Imagine being an American soldier in the final days of World War II. You've spent years fighting German troops across Europe. Then suddenly, you're handed an order that sounds impossible. Your new allies are German soldiers. Not only that, together, you're about to defend a medieval castle against one of Hitler's most fanatical forces, the SS. It sounds like fiction, but it really happened, and it's one of the strangest battles in military history.
By early May 1945, Nazi Germany was collapsing. Berlin had fallen. Hitler was dead. Across Europe, exhausted German units were surrendering by the thousands. But not everyone was willing to accept defeat. The Waffen-SS remained fiercely loyal to Hitler's ideology. Many refused to surrender, choosing instead to keep fighting anyone they considered a traitor. Meanwhile, high in the Austrian Alps stood an old medieval fortress known as Castle Itter. Its stone walls had once protected nobles. Now they held some of France's most famous political prisoners, former prime ministers, generals, resistance leaders, and even tennis champion Jean Borotra. The prisoners believed liberation was only days away. Instead, they found themselves trapped between two armies, and the men who would come to save them were the last people anyone expected.
Castle Itter wasn't an ordinary prison. Unlike the concentration camps scattered across Nazi-occupied Europe, this castle held VIP prisoners, French politicians, military commanders, national heroes, people Hitler considered too valuable or too dangerous to execute immediately. As Germany collapsed, the guards stationed there began disappearing. Some fled, others simply abandoned their posts. For a brief moment, freedom seemed within reach. But the prisoners quickly realized something terrifying. Outside the castle, armed SS units were still roaming the countryside. Without protection, they wouldn't survive long. So they made a desperate decision. They sent messengers through enemy territory, searching for anyone willing to help. But no one knew who would arrive first. The Americans or the SS.
Not far from the castle was Major Joseph Gangl. Only weeks earlier, he had been fighting against American forces as an officer in the German Wehrmacht. Now, everything had changed. Gangl had seen Germany's defeat. He had watched the SS continue killing civilians even after the war was effectively over. Enough was enough. Instead of following the collapsing Nazi command, Gangl made an extraordinary choice. He turned against the SS. His new mission wasn't to save Germany, it was to save lives. Working with members of the Austrian resistance, Gangl learned about the trapped prisoners inside Castle Itter. But he knew his small force couldn't defend the castle alone. There was only one option left. He had to ask the enemy for help. Imagine the risk. A German officer approaching American soldiers only days after years of brutal combat. One misunderstanding, one nervous trigger pull, and everything would end before it began.
Captain John Jack Lee of the U.S. Army had already fought his way through some of Europe's toughest battles. When he heard a German officer wanted to speak with him, he was skeptical. It sounded like a trap. But as Gangl explained the situation, something became clear. The enemy wasn't standing in front of him anymore. The real threat was still wearing SS uniforms. Lee made a decision few officers ever expected to make. He accepted Gangl's offer. Within hours, American soldiers climbed into Sherman tanks. German Wehrmacht troops joined them. Side by side, former enemies rolled toward Castle Itter. No one knew if they would survive, but they all knew why they were fighting.
When the defenders reached the castle, they barely had time to prepare. Soon, the SS appeared. Hundreds of determined troops surrounded the fortress. Machine guns opened fire. Bullets shattered centuries-old stone walls. The battle had begun. Inside the castle stood one of history's strangest alliances: American infantry, German Wehrmacht soldiers, French prisoners, Austrian resistance fighters, all defending the same position. Every rifle mattered, every bullet counted, and the attackers weren't giving up. Then came another problem. The defenders were running out of ammunition. As the firefight intensified, communications failed. Supplies were almost gone. The Sherman tank defending the entrance was knocked out. Smoke filled the courtyard. The defenders realized a terrible truth. No reinforcements were coming unless someone could break through the SS lines. Then, one man volunteered: Jean Borotra, the former French tennis champion. Instead of hiding behind the castle walls, he climbed over them, dodging enemy fire, running through forests. He sprinted for miles, searching for American forces. It was perhaps the most dangerous race of his life. But inside the castle, the situation was becoming desperate.
The SS launched wave after wave of attacks. Every minute felt like the last. Major Joseph Gangl moved through the courtyard helping organize the defense. Then, tragedy struck. A sniper's bullet hit Gangl as he tried to protect former French Prime Minister Paul Reynaud. He died doing something unimaginable. A German officer giving his life to save a French statesman while fighting alongside American soldiers. Not long afterward, the sound everyone had been praying for echoed through the valley. American reinforcements. Fresh troops stormed toward the castle. Caught between the defenders and the arriving U.S. forces, the SS finally broke. The siege was over. Against every expectation, the castle had survived. The Battle of Castle Itter lasted only a single day, yet it became one of the most extraordinary moments of World War II. Not because of the number of soldiers involved, not because of its size, but because it shattered every expectation. Americans fought beside Germans. German soldiers defended French prisoners. Former enemies trusted one another, while fanatics refused to surrender. In the final days of a devastating war, people weren't fighting for nations anymore. They were fighting for humanity. And perhaps that's why this forgotten battle still matters today. It reminds us that history isn't always divided into simple sides of good and evil. Sometimes, the most incredible stories are the ones where yesterday's enemies become today's allies.